I'd like to thank the new Minister for Transport for his introduction to this bill. It was a little surprising, some of the stuff we heard. I also echo the previous committee members who have spoken to thank Dr Helen Pelosi at ESR for the sound advice she's given us, the tour of the facility during the select committee process, on a select committee which I also believe is an extremely collegial and helpful place to be discussing these issues, ably chaired by Andy Foster, but the entire committee I think works in quite a good way. The committee went out to ESR and I think that trip settled a lot of issues people had about privacy. One of the issues that I was concerned about initially was the use of samples for other things beyond driving, like some kind of Misuse of Drugs Act offence, but we've been assured that is not the case with this bill and that won't be a part of it. The thresholds, Madam Speaker, the thresholds were designed, we heard in committee, to be a proxy for impairment, as the previous speaker, member has just alluded to. It's not an easy thing to judge impairment as a proxy with saliva levels, because as the research is being conducted now to come up with these levels, there needed to be a bit more leeway given to getting devices that can actually measure these things. I do have to say I was rather disappointed in committee to have the advice from the officials that we can't give you decent options around time that it will take to do these tests because we don't have procurement, and procurement's going to have to follow the law. I was deeply uncomfortable with that. I think that we should be expecting better in committee. That said, I should outright say that ACT will be supporting this second reading in case there is any doubt, but there are some issues in there that we need to be clear about. I do feel that given the advice that we received in committee, we can be confident that there is a good correlation as a proxy between saliva and blood levels and impairment, although not perfect, and that is being developed, so I would like to see that progress a bit further as the Minister in charge approves these devices. We also heard, Madam Speaker, in committee about the operationalisation of the drug testing regime, and the word random was used. Random being used to say, when you hear the word random, you think of just be picking up any old driver who's cruising down State Highway in New Zealand. But actually, the police said that they're going to be operating that testing in not exactly a random way. It will be systematic and about proportionate risk to areas, times of day, and events that are occurring in that area. So I think it's important that people, when they hear that this will be applied in a random way, understand that it's not random in the dictionary definition sense. It is actually going to have a more strategic approach given to the way that's dealt with. The Attorney General, Madam Speaker, also raised issues with a Section 7 report, as she is required in some ways to do when these sort of issues arise. And there were some issues that actors are somewhat uncomfortable with and do want to see fleshed out a bit with the Minister at Committee of the Whole. Those include the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure and the right not to be arbitrarily detained. The first one about the unreasonable search and seizure is about, if you're going to someone based on a random screening test, that should have quite a high bar before you go and look at taking a sample of someone's blood or saliva in this case. I think that this is an issue, this being drug driving and the danger that imposes on New Zealanders and their families, that to my judgment warrants a regime for drug driving testing. It's pretty hard to deny that someone who is on drugs can, at certain levels, be a big danger to themselves when operating any type of machinery, and a vehicle travelling down the road at anywhere between 10 and 100 k an hour can always be dangerous. So I think it's important that we weigh up the freedom of New Zealanders to not have arbitrary blood samples taken, but also the freedom of New Zealanders to expect to be able to go about their lawful business without the danger that is imposed on them by people who are operating in a completely dangerous way on the road. So I think there is a test there that is passed, although I think the Attorney General's Section 7 report on that matter. The other matter that the Attorney General raised was about the arbitrary detention. How long can someone be stopped on the side of the road required to give a sample? Now, and this, as I alluded to earlier in my speech here, we didn't get a lot of advice about time from officials, and I think that the committee should have been able to expect a bit more in that way. But, we as a committee decided that, on balance, we need to be moving in a direction that is going to provide New Zealanders freedoms to move and freedoms to be the right to be not arbitrarily detained. And so we came to a balance, and the committee's commentary reflects that. It also reflects that there is a time that someone can be expected to be held on the road in New Zealand law without any reason, and it was alluded to earlier by Pangi Utakiri. It's Section 114 of the Land Transport Act, which sets out a 15-minute limit for an enforcement officer to hold someone on the side of the road for the purposes of gathering information about who that person is before they have to either release them or move on to another piece of legislation. So we put that in the commentary for all to see, and I think we could expect to see something be done when this bill comes up to review, because it will be reviewed. There is a statutory review of the bill is a good idea. I think a new scheme like this needs to be well checked, and the committee looked at when that should happen, and we've given some advice about bringing some of that time forward to make sure it can be completed in time to check that this regime is actually working. Madam Speaker, the thresholds the previous speaker from the Green Party mentioned that there's not a lot of science about these thresholds. Well, there are Australian New Zealand standards that are operating in this area. So there is science developing. There is agreements that are happening between New Zealand scientists, Australian scientists from many states in Australia coming together and working out how this scheme can, how these levels can be tested, correlated with impairment. So there is actually a standard there. And I think that giving a level of accuracy that New Zealanders can feel confident is not taking away the rights of their fellow New Zealanders when they are going about their lawful business, but also giving the people the right to feel safer on the road, because there's too many stories of people in New Zealand dying on our roads needlessly, and the pain that causes on all sides is quite traumatic. So I think that is something that has to be weighed up, Madam Speaker, when it comes to this. There's one more piece in here, Madam Speaker, which I'd like to touch on, which is the accompanying an officer to a place to be tested, where the committee had a good discussion about this. The wording that we've come up to in our commentary reflects the conversation, and that is that we do not expect that this will be used as a way to get somebody who has been stopped for the purpose of a random roadside oral fluid screening test and removed from that location to a distant location. It's fair enough if the police stop someone and say, look, this is not a safe place to perform this test, accompany me over the berm here or off the road into somewhere that's a bit more safer. That is a fair enough thing, but the wording I felt was a little bit, and I'm no lawyer, and this House is full of very capable lawyers, but the wording to me seemed a bit too loose. As in, you could say, look, I suspect you of drug driving as an officer, and I'd like you to accompany me to the station where we have a machine which has been procured, which is not transportable. I just don't think that's something that New Zealanders would expect. And we were given advice in committee that that's not what would happen. It would be used for the safety of the person being checked and the officer involved, not for a process of removing that individual off to a distant location. And I just wanted to make sure that was on the record, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, all of this said, I think this is something that time has come. There does need to be a way for New Zealanders to be confident that 74% of New Zealanders don't feel they can get away with drug driving on New Zealand roads. That is a thing that a state that's looking after its citizens should be concerned about. And I think this bill is weighing these up. There's more to be done, but I look forward to having a conversation at committee of the whole. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well, that's actually an interesting point, because imagine if, say, you end up on the desert road at the Three Sisters and you have to be taken to a police station and you got Wairu, which is probably 20 minutes in one direction, 20 to 30 in one direction, you've got Turangi in the other 20 to 30 minutes direction. That is quite a long distance. And then what happens if you have a negative test? Do the police officers drive you back to that place, which potentially could put an hour? Now, if you're on driving restricted hours, such as in truck driving, that's quite a big jump. Now, I will be honest, cops don't typically willy-nilly pull trucks over on the side of the road for random things. They tend to let way stations do that job. So if there's an alert, they tend to flag it, and they basically flag it to stop it at an open way station or to flag the alert then. But, there are all sorts of things there. But, like, put it that way, say you get stopped in the middle of the Three Sisters on the desert road, that is quite a big distance to the nearest police stations, and that's just where the nearest civilization is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at the moment, talking about the randomization of these tests. So at the moment, the police can only ask you to take a drug impairment test if they suspect your ability to drive is compromised. But under this bill, it would become legal for the police to conduct random saliva-based roadside tests on any driver without suspecting impairment. So this is the same way how police currently conduct random alcohol breath tests. The issue is that this bill will not just test for impairment, it will also test for the presence of drugs. And how long drugs can stay in your system depends on what was taken and how fast your metabolism is. So, for example, THC in saliva can actually remain in your system for a couple of days. Amphetamines can also be detectable in your saliva for 24 hours up to several days after dosing. So these drugs can stay in your system even after the effects have worn off, and this means that people may be able to drive without impairment, but the drug will still be detectable.
And it doesn't address, like, if we remember from the last time we covered this bill, which was Select Me when we had Rachel Ford on the show, like, the biggest one was about fatigue. Fatigue could sprout more drug impairment symptoms than actually being on the drugs.
And, I brought up the point in that one, and I know some people got upset with me. It is important that testing is conducted, but, we also got to have standards that protect people. Make sure that they are still able to go to work and stuff like that.
Like, as I say, if you ended up, like, in your situation, If you got told, sorry, you can't drive for 12 hours, like you can't even sit down there and get beyond the 100k sign leaving your town.
Yeah, it's like
it's not like me who I can walk straight out to the road and I've got what do you call it, free high frequency bus routes right by there, and I might be waving at Julianne who's riding on a bike.
Yeah, in a rural community like where I live, let's take my sister for an example. She's injured her back. She might have to take tramadol. Okay, but she has to go to work. It's in her job's a factory job. It's in Masterton, right?
Yeah.
What happens if she gets pulled over by the police?
Yeah.
She's a responsible driver. She doesn't have a criminal record at all.
Probably drives a Suzuki Swift, not a boy racer car.
No, she's not driving a big giant ute. She's driving like a Suzuki Alto, right?
Oh,
yeah. Just a little car, or like a Honda Civic.
Yeah, does it have 3 or 4 cylinders?
Ooh, I'm pretty sure it's 3 cylinders. It's a 600cc engine. It's just a tiny guy.
What year?
Oh shit! I have to get the year. I don't know, but
does it have 2 letters or 3 letters in the number plate?
Hold on, are you saying this is one of yours?
No. So pre-2000, most of the car number plates had 2 letters in them. Post-2000, they have 3.
Okay, I think it's post-2000. The car's out the front yard. I'd have to run out there.
Yeah. It's a little 600. See, I used to drive around in 800cc Suzuki Altos, and the motor that was in them was called an F8B. And the reason why it was B was the 3-cylinder model, A was the 4-cylinder model.
Ah, okay.
And these were carburetors. Now, I mean, to be honest, fuel injectors so much easier, car start much easier. Carburetors were a pain in the butt on a wet, moist day. And I can tell you right now, when I lived in Kandala, it was a pain in the butt starting a carburetor car. But I mean, your sister ain't driving a boy racer's car. Your sister is driving a car that probably only does 70 k's up Mount Bruce instead of 120.
Yeah. So I know there is a clause bill that says you can defend yourself if you've got a prescription or something. But let's be real here. Sometimes when you have a chronic pain condition or you've had an injury, okay, and this happens in my household. I have medications from when I had to go through surgery and I have chronic pain, right? She doesn't have time to go to the doctors to get a script. Sometimes you just got to take what your sister has got, right? Take a small dose of that, go to work, so you can get some money. Yeah, this happens. This is pretty common in rural communities because we don't have access to 24/7 hour doctors. So you take a little bit of this medication so you've got enough in the system to go do some mahi. In the town that you work for. What happens if you get called by the police? You don't have a defense, right? You're in agony, you're in pain. What if you have to drive to the hospital? And
that just got you to the hospital door.
Yeah, and that got you enough.
This is a box of Panadol. It lives in the ballot camera toolbox. I can tell you right now, Nick used these more than I did.
Yes.
And it was just because the fact, he had Panadol at home, but he knew I carried Panadol on me.
Yep.
I didn't have lamotrigine, which is one of his medications he's prescribed, because guess what? I'm not prescribed that. I wouldn't want to be either. But that's the thing there. It's I've had that thing in there. I also have another one in my coffee cart float box of Panadol. And I can tell you right now, people who've worked with me have used it as well. You won't find the strong medications. You won't find my prep in there, but you will find, say, the Panadol stuff that sits there. And I mean, my GP knows that I'll probably get a script, and he knows I throw it in the box in there. But he says, Panadol used safely, isn't going to sit there and cause any problems. As long as you sit there and stick to recommendations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in situations where I might have a sibling that, because they all do sports, they do strongman in particular. Yeah. They may have injured their back. Okay, they've got to drive to the hospital. I can't go with them, but they've got to drive to the hospital. And an ambulance, what the fuck is an ambulance?
It might be deemed low priority.
Yeah, low priority. So what do? You go, okay, here, take some.
What happens if Steve's mother has a heart attack in Pongaroa? Exactly. I can tell you, who's going to get taken to the hospital first?
Exactly. So it's you're able to drive if you've got some medication on board. Take a bit of tramadol and drive yourself down there.
Yeah.
Okay? Imagine if there's a drug checkpoint. Get out of the car, you can't drive 12 hours. Oh, I need to go to the hospital. I've got to, it's like, no, if you've got a prescription. So, yeah, I can picture this really impacting rural communities quite negatively.
Yeah, and especially if you get, like, a cop who wants to, like, I actually, be honest, rural cops don't
dickhead cop,
hot-headed. But if you got a cop who was hot-headed, who was, like, just trying to flex their muscles to show who's boss, that could potentially cause all sorts of problems.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully the cops in my area are really nice people. But, we've all come across a dickhead cop.
Oh, yeah. And even the police know, we've got...
Yeah, they know who the dickheads are on the force.
Yeah. Well, considering one of them they do consider a deserter, who is our current Minister of Police.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.